Live from Ann Arbor, Michigan, this is Veterans Radio. And now, here's your host, Gary Lilly.
And good evening and welcome to Veterans Radio on this second day of July, the day after the anniversary of two great battles that were part of the Cost of Freedom. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, is the Cost of Freedom. I'm here with Al Friedman, who's professor of modern history at Henry Ford Community College. Welcome, Al.
Al, thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome. And Ingrid Weber out there taking control of everything else, and Drew Prevey, our engineer. Thank you, Drew. I understand we have Dale Throneberry on the lines.
Yeah, you do.
Dale, you're out in Washington, D.C.
I am in Washington, D.C., and I want to give you an up-to-date report. I'm here for the very first reunion I've ever gone to of the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association. And we've got 1,500 pilots, another 1,500 family members, and it's just it's an incredible experience. And to be here in Washington over the 4th of July, it's something that everybody should experience, and I would strongly encourage all of those veterans out there, if they've never been to a reunion, to go to one, just for fun, just to meet those guys that you hadn't seen in years.
Dale, I remember you agonizing over whether or not to go, and everybody was saying, go, go. And I heard it in your voice when I spoke to you yesterday, how excited you were.
It is very exciting. I've run into some very good friends that I hadn't seen in 40 years. And the nice thing about reunions is that there are people that will verify your war stories.
That's a serious...
I really didn't make that up, did I?
Well, I've talked with friends about that a lot. Is truly the value of the reunions. You talk about these things and you realize that it was not in your imagination.
No, I know. I think it's great. And again, I want to wish you a good show tonight. And if my nephew is on, give him greetings from me, because I know he'll do a great job for you on the Civil War. And I wish you good luck with your program. And I'll be back in a couple of days with lots of pictures and more stories.
Well, we're looking forward to it, and we're looking forward to a full report next week. Thanks,
Dale.
Yes,
sir. Will do. Good luck. See ya.
And in the news of the day, recently the Home Depot refused to allow protesters from Kansas to use their land for staging a protest across the street from the home where a fallen soldier's funeral service was being held. With Home Depot refusing permission to the protesters, the Michigan State Police, who were there to protect their right to protest, instead were able to escort the protesters out of town, to the cheers of 400 Patriot Guard bikers and 1,500 flag-waving Americans, and the operators of 15 giant fire trucks that were parked there to drown out the insults of the protesters. The protesters from Kansas made this claim as they left: "The godless state of Michigan does not deserve true servants of God." Thank you, Home Depot. Also, in other news, Michael Moore is being sued by a Massachusetts National Guardsman for $85 million, accusing the filmmaker of distorting a TV interview to portray the soldier as anti-war in his so-called documentary Fahrenheit 9/11. Sergeant Peter Damon, 33, a double amputee, has stated that Moore didn't have his permission to use pieces of the on-camera interview he gave to an NBC nightly news correspondent at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. Damon said, "I was complaining about the pain I would have been having if it weren't for the painkiller." Damon's lawyer weighed in, saying it's upsetting to him because he's lived his life supportive of his government. He's been a patriot, he's been a soldier, and he's now being portrayed in a movie that is the antithesis of all that. We wish Sergeant Damon all of the luck in the world. He has earned it. And, Hal, this show tonight we're going to be talking about the Somme. There's a lot of information to cover there. One of the first day of the Somme was one of the bloodiest days in history, and we'll be getting into that right after this break. The cost of freedom. Millions of people have died to keep the world free because despicable people have tried to take away freedom from us and from everyone else. Hal Friedman. On July 1st, 1916, the British and the French attacked the Germans across a 16-mile front. What was their purpose? On the surface, this battle seemed like it was just an awful mismanagement and an awful mistake.
Yeah, the Battle of the Somme was both untypical and typical of battles in World War I fought by the Allied High Command. It was untypical in that it went on for 5 months. It caused 600,000 casualties on the part of the British. But it was typical in that it was the worst conducted in a whole series or whole line of badly conducted battles conducted by the Allied High Command, that is. The purpose of the battle was for the British to take pressure off the French, who had been attacked by the Germans in Verdun earlier in 1916.
That in itself was a bloody battle.
Yes, that went on for 10 months. 800,000 men lost their lives. It bled the French army white. In fact, it really prepared the French army in a way for mutinies that took place in the French army in 1917, when French soldiers began to decide basically not to fight because they'd been led so badly and bled so badly as well. So the Somme was meant to take the heat off the French. Unfortunately, it was badly planned, it was badly conducted, as were a lot of the battles between 1914 and 1917 by the Allied High Command.
General Haig was in command?
General Haig was in command, and General Haig was behind the lines. And as you and I talked earlier about, General Haig made a lot of decisions without having seen the battlefield or seen the field. And from the shells that were used to shell the German lines to preparations of the troops, telling them to take full field packs with them on July 1st as they marched toward German lines.
One of the hottest days of the year.
Yeah, I mean, all these things were really poorly planned out. The History Channel Battlefield Detective Show did a really good investigation of this, found that the British troops were weighted down too heavily with equipment. The shells the British Army was using were not effective enough in taking out German trenches.
The British artillery bombardment was supposed to take out the wire, take out the trenches, kill all the Germans, and be so effective that the men were ordered to walk across no man's land.
Right.
And so that's in some places that was 900 yards, and that gave the Germans plenty of time to come out of the bunkers because they hadn't been killed.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that became really apparent is that the German High Command had put a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of trouble into constructing its trenches and its dugouts. They had figured out that their troops were going to be in these trenches for a while, so they went to great effort to make sure the troops were warm, dry, fairly well fed, could sleep well, and that the dugouts and trenches could resist, the dugouts in particular, could resist heavy shell fire. The British and the French, for some reason, didn't do that. The trenches were like half-filled holes full of water, and were just primitive.
I've seen photographs. Now that you mention it, I've seen photographs of the British and the French trenches, and they just looked awful.
Yeah,
and barely supported on the sides, full of mud at the bottom. The people, they had trench foot. That's where it came from. Well, the German trenches, as you said, in the photographs, they are in terrific condition.
Yeah.
And so this artillery bombardment did not kill the Germans. I'm sure it rattled their nerves, but you can still fight and fire a machine gun with bad nerves.
Absolutely. All you have to do is wait in the dugouts. When the shells stop, you come up to the trenches and wait for the troops to try to get across no man's land and start up with the rifle and machine gun fire. I think there was an attempt on the part of the British to construct a rolling barrage, which is a barrage of artillery that proceeds a little ahead of the troops as they advance, a sort of protective wall of steel, if you will. But there were coordination problems, as there were all through the war, and so the Germans still had that break between the shells stopping and being able to come up to the trenches and waiting for the British.
Well, there's Murphy's Laws of Combat, and one of those laws is no plan survives first contact with the enemy.
That's right. Friction of war is a classic and ever-present reality of war. And
we hear all the time about how badly conducted Vietnam was, how badly conducted the Iraq War is, and by definition, war is badly conducted. There's no way that you can go through a war flawlessly without making mistakes. It's just a blunder after blunder, and it's men with mud on their boots that make up for the blunders that the people sitting at the desk make.
Yeah, there can be differences, though. There can be differences, however. There was a British division commander at the Somme who had figured out that the way to breach German lines was to infiltrate small groups of men into the lines and cut the wires and get into the trenches and pierce the trenches and then bring up larger groups of men to create larger breaches. But that commander wasn't listened to at the higher levels.
And those lines, those defenses were in some places 20 miles deep, right? We have a caller on the line, and you guys in the back will put it through? Okay. Hello?
Hello.
Well, the voice sounds familiar.
Yeah. I think that division that you were talking about was the 36th Ulster, wasn't it, that breached the German line?
I'm not sure, but probably, yeah.
Okay, two questions I have. Is it true that the British, for the main part, did not have loaded weapons when they made their assault, that they depended on the bayonet to, I guess, frighten off the Germans?
I'd have to look that up. I would think they would have loaded weapons, but yeah, the British Army placed a lot of emphasis on
the bayonet,
cutting through with the steel.
I did hear something about that. That's foggy way back in the memory. And for the listeners, that's my brother Gene on the phone, and we have an interest in the Battle of the Somme because I have sitting on the desk here, I brought it with me, a photograph of our grandfather in his kilt with the Royal Seaforth Highlanders. There are 6 people in the photograph. The only one that lived through World War I was our grandfather. And sitting on either side of him in the photograph are his 2 brothers who were killed that day going over the top at the Somme, and his brother-in-law-to-be. So Gene and I do have an interest in the first day of the Somme. You had another question, Gene.
Well, the second was regarding the division that I mentioned earlier that made it through the German lines, and that was, if I'm correct, it was the Ulster Division, which is Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. And I had read that they took such tremendous casualties and were more or less left after they breached the German lines because they were viewed as troublemakers. Have you heard anything or read anything to that?
I had not, but a division commander who had those different kinds of ideas about how to do things probably would be somewhat ostracized in the British High Command. He would be seen as strange, and that could very much interfere with how the battle was conducted and whether his division was supported or not. And if they were the only ones to breach and everybody else got held back, then they were just there on their own. Yeah.
Amongst other things, they were shelled by their own artillery, which I guess wasn't that unusual in those days with poor communications.
No.
And General Haig ordered gas. You think about the gas being only used by the Germans. He had smoke and he had gas that just added to the confusion of the battle. When you're throwing out smoke, it blinds everybody. And the purpose of it was to cause the Germans to put on their gas masks and cause them fatigue and not to be able to shoot as well. But if you read the accounts by the German machine gunners, the troops coming in front of them were so thick that they didn't even have to aim. They just fired and they were mowing them down.
Yeah, this really would have been a case where you could do more with less in the sense of that division commander who thought getting small groups in, breaching the lines. And frankly, this is what the Germans did later on in their 1918 offensive. The stormtroopers, the Sturmtruppen, were small units of shock troops that were meant to breach Allied lines very quietly, very covertly, and then you bring in larger units, and you open the breaches, and you really get in behind the lines. And I don't know if they got that idea from this British general or came up with it on their own.
Each side tends to learn from the others. Gene, do you recall our grandfather, Grandy, how he was after the war?
I don't recall much about him. He never said anything. The only time I ever recalled him talking about the war was when he and a chum of his were drinking, and they were sitting there reminiscing, I guess, and as kids in those days did, they sat in a corner and kept quiet, which is what I did, and I imagine you and our other brother, and I just remember them talking about it.
Our grandmother said he had nightmares to the day he died.
Time he died,
Yeah.
And she also said that was the reason for his drinking, because after he was wounded, instead of being sent to the rear or being discharged, because they were so short on manpower, he was made a stretcher bearer and going out and bringing back the dead and wounded. And I recall her vividly saying that before they went out, they had as much to drink as they wanted, probably to numb their minds more than have a good time, I guess is what, for lack of a better way to put it. But
did anyone
he had nightmares until he died.
A question for both of you: Did anyone ever talk about the deceased uncles, your great uncles, or were they not?
I only heard that growing up that my grandfather's brothers were killed on either side of him going over the top, and I learned much later that it was at the Somme.
Okay.
Did you ever hear anything about them? Gene, you've done some genealogy.
No, I've really tried to, and it's difficult because during the Second World War, the L's were records on L were destroyed in the London Blitz, and some of these records are just now coming online. But it was very difficult to do any research. And let me add one thing, but besides the two uncles killed in France, there was one uncle who had emigrated to Australia, joined the Australian Army, and was wounded at Gallipoli and died on the hospital ship. So my grandfather lost 3 of his brothers. And
that was the story of the Scots in World War I. Scotland made up 10% of the population of England. They made up 15% of the armed forces, and they made up 20% of the casualties.
Yeah.
And there was a time during World War I when 1 out of 40 people serving in the British Army were from the city of Glasgow.
And in a related matter of casualties, again, the Somme is typical in the sense that the British took such heavy casualties in World War I. Literally, the British lost an entire generation of young men in World War I. So if you went to Great Britain in the 1930s, 1940s, you would literally see elderly men doing the jobs of younger men because those younger men simply weren't around.
And my brother Gene was telling me that he read that one of the reasons the French did so poorly in World War II was that after World War I, the mothers raised their children to be pacifists.
Yeah.
And as a result, when World War II came along, they weren't fighters. It's sad to say that we need the warriors, and we still need the warriors.
Yeah.
The Somme was one of the first examples of the use of tanks.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll get back to that in another show. We're coming up on a break, and this is Veterans Radio.
The Medal of Honor is the highest award for valor in combat given a member of the Armed Forces of the United States. There have been over 3,400 recipients of the nation's highest award. This is one of them. First Lieutenant Samuel Woodfill killed more than 10 German soldiers in France in one combat action. Details after this. While he was leading his company against the enemy, his line came under heavy machine gun fire, which threatened to hold up the advance. Followed by 2 soldiers at 25 yards, Woodfill went on ahead of his first line toward a machine gun nest and worked his way around its flank, leaving the two soldiers in front. When he got within 10 yards of the gun, it ceased firing, and 4 of the enemy appeared. 3 of them were shot by Woodfill. The 4th rushed Woodfill, who attempted to club the enemy with his rifle. After a hand-to-hand struggle, Woodfill killed the enemy with his pistol. His company continued to advance until shortly afterwards another machine gun nest was encountered. Calling on his men to follow, Woodfill rushed ahead of his line in the face of heavy fire from the nest, and when several of the enemy appeared above the nest, he shot them, capturing 3 other members of the crew and silencing the gun. A few minutes later, Woodfill, for the 3rd time, demonstrated conspicuous daring by charging another machine gun position, killing 5 men in one machine gun pit with his rifle. He then drew his revolver and started to jump into the pit when 2 other gunners, only a few yards away, turned their gun on him. Failing to kill them with his revolver, he grabbed a pick lying nearby and killed both of them. Inspired by the exceptional courage displayed by Woodfill, his men pressed on to their objective under severe shell and machine gun fire. The Medal of Honor series is a production of Veterans Radio.
After the discovery on June 30th that Gettysburg was occupied by Brigadier General John Buford's division of Federal Cavalry, the Confederates sent the divisions of Major General Henry Heath and Major General William Pender down the Chambersburg Road to drive Buford away and occupy Gettysburg. The battle began at 5:30 a.m. July 3, 1863, after initial success on July 1st, followed by mixed results on July 2nd, General Lee's confidence was unshaken, and he ordered Longstreet, who had been reinforced by Major General George Pickett's division, to renew his assault on the Federal left. However, circumstances forced him to modify his plans and shift his main attack to the Federal center at Cemetery Ridge. A great bombardment of the Federal line opened, and the Federal artillery replied. A giant duel ensued, which lasted for nearly 2 hours. After the bombardment subsided, the infantry went forward. This has subsequently been known throughout history as Pickett's Charge. We listen as Mr. Gary Lilly, correspondent for the Richmond Daily Examiner, solicits a moment with General Pickett to ask him about the charge that just ended so ignominiously.
General Pickett, a moment of your time, sir.
What can I do for you? Can't you see I'm busy?
Sir, I'm a correspondent with the Richmond Daily Examiner, and I'd like to find out, did we have victory?
Well, no, sir, we did not have victory, but your voice, it sounds like you're a northerner.
I am, sir. I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan. That town is full of abolitionists, though, and I'm a firm believer in states' rights, so I've come down here to help the cause with my pen.
Well, I hope you're not a spy, because I can deal with spies quite easily, sir.
If I'm a spy, it's the firing squad, I know it, but I do have credentials I can show you. Please, sir, I'm down here to find out about the battle. How did we do?
Very well, very well. Sir, we were defeated most... Oh, it's just terrible. It's just terrible. I lost 2,300 men.
2,300? How many did you have?
Well, my division had 5,000, sir. Total charge, there were 2 other divisions involved, and total men in the charge were 12,500.
My word. I saw you speaking to General Lee. What was said?
Well, sir, he asked me. He says, General Pickett, how are you? And I just shook my head, and then he said, General Pickett, you must set your defensive men up here. And I looked at him and I said, sir, I have no division. I was quite depressed, very shaken.
How did we do in other parts of the line?
On the other parts of the line, we're holding, sir. We are holding. I don't believe the Federals are going to charge us, so I think they've had enough, too. I've spoken to General Longstreet. He seems to think that the Yankees will just hold and see what happens next.
General, what happened? The plan, there was such a plan. You met last night?
Well, I did walk in on General Lee and General Longstreet about 12 midnight last night, talking about the charge to take place today. And both of them were arguing. General Longstreet said, you should not do this charge. It shouldn't happen. There's too many Yankees over there. No 12,000 or 15,000 men could break the center of the Union Army. But General Lee was confident in my boys. Always been confident in the Virginians. And he was quite adamant with General Longstreet that the charge would take place. so I was just a bystander listening. And I do believe that even though General Long is my dear and faithful friend, that General Lee had confidence in my men that we could have had victory.
Was the charge not pressed forward? How your men were they? What was their mood this morning?
Oh, they were quite confident in victory, sir. They knew their duty. They knew what was before them, and with that confidence, they were willing to give their lives for their freedom, for their.
I heard the battle cry when you ordered the charge. You were out there yourself.
Well, yes, sir, I was. I followed the men up to Corridor Farm, which is just a little bit past Emmitsburg Road, and from there I directed the rest of the battle from there. And my boys, they were brave. They were so. We should have been able. If we just had more support, sir, we would have taken the day.
The smoke is clearing, and we can see the field. It's littered. It's littered with our troops.
There are over 7,000 casualties out there, sir.
And
and from the previous day, there's still people laying out there from the previous day of battle. It's just horrendous, the amount of death. Oh, it's unbelievable.
What will you do next?
Well, I must rearrange my division here and try and set up a defensive position along the rest of the Army, and then I do believe General Lee will come with some more orders tomorrow. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that we are defeated, and we'll be going back to Virginia.
Sir, will this mean the end of the South?
Well, sir, I don't believe that we're going to win this war, but General Lee is still confident. He's going to reorganize in Virginia, and hopefully we can still take the fight to the Federals in the North.
Those are your true feelings? You don't believe that we can win?
There's just too many Yankees. They outnumber us.
But we have the spirit.
Yes, well, we do. But like I said, they can just basically annihilate us with their numbers.
Are our men equipped? It was 80. The temperature was almost 90 degrees when the charge took place.
And most of the boys were in their 100% wool uniforms, but a lot of them took their jackets off to make the charge, which was very good. I had no problem with that. There were some people out there with heat exhaustion, and but they like a parade, army on parade. They marched across that 1.25 miles and hit the center of the Federal Army like nobody's business. I mean, they were brave. I just have never seen men so brave before, and we should have been able to take the day.
We saw the oblique movement from back here, and then the smoke got so thick, but it appeared that you were at the wall. You were right at their lines.
We broke through, sir. General Armstead and about 200 boys broke through the rock wall, went about 100 feet or so into the line, and because there was no support behind them, they either had to give up, die, or skedaddle. And most of them stayed and died for the cause. Armstead, I believe, has been taken captured. Has been captured, sir.
What about your other leaders? How many?
General Kemper, I believe, is mortally wounded as of this moment, and he is being taken back to be looked at by our surgeons. General Garnet, I have heard nothing from him, although they said they saw his horse riding off the field without him, so we believe he is dead too, sir. Most of my major officers are dead. Like I said, 2,300 casualties of 5,000 men. Terrible.
And the artillery. We had the artillery.
Oh, there was over 150 cannon firing at that Federal. And I do not know why we were still faced with so many Yankees at the point of attack, at the point of impact. It was just, they should have been blown away from there. I just don't understand this.
And General Lee, what is his spirit now?
Well, I saw him riding off, and as I was riding off, watching him, he was telling the boys that it was all his fault, not their fault. They did what they had to do. And he said, we will reorganize and we will come at him again.
But he's a magnificent leader, is he not? General Lee, we all believe in General Lee.
Well, sir, I have great respect for the man, but I don't know. I just don't believe that this attack should have taken place, and I hold him accountable for my losses of my men and my boys. I loved them. And I tell you the truth, sir, I'd rather be there on the field dead with them than be living.
Will there be more attacks? Will there be more fighting here at Gettysburg?
I don't know, sir, yet. This is, we'll have to see tomorrow morning, and tomorrow morning is July 4th. And we'll just have to see what occurs. I haven't heard anything yet. I must tend to my men and, reorganize them here.
General Pickett, thank you so much for your time. You bring most disheartening news. Most disheartening.
Well, I do believe that we should get back to Virginia and reorganize. And hopefully, again, do our best to win the cause. But I fear it is lost.
I'm just shocked to hear that, and I have to go back and absorb that. General Pickett, thank you so much.
You're welcome, sir. Now I must attend to my boys.
God bless you, General.
God bless you too, sir.
Beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. So said old Ben Franklin. Well, he would be very happy with the Sidetrack Bar and Grill. Located in Ypsilanti's historic depot town, Sidetrack Bar and Grill offers 2 happy hours. That's right, 2. The first one is from 3 to 7 p.m., and the second from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. closing. Happy hours are 16 selections of 25-ounce drafts at a very special price. And of course, bottled favorites of your lovable suds are also available to you at Sidetrack Bar and Grill. You may also choose from their full-service menu for appetizers, sandwiches, salads, and absolutely the best burgers, period. Deluxe buffet catering for any event is available, from sit-down dinners to theme parties. Sidetrack Bar and Grill does it all. Stop by at 56 East Cross Street or call Sidetrack Bar and Grill at 483-1035 for more details.
Talk See you Radio 1600 WAAM.
A common misconception remains that the soldiers of both sides felt an enduring kinship with their adversaries and fought only due to duty or uncontrollable happenstance. This assumption was fallacious. In the first hour after Pickett's division was repulsed, James Allen Davis, special artist correspondent for Harper's Weekly, was able to interview Lieutenant Frank Haskell, adjutant to Brigadier General Gibbon, commander of the Federal Forces at the vortex of the Maelstrom.
Lieutenant Haskell, sir.
Yes.
James Allen Davis, at your service, Harper's Weekly. I wonder if you may spare me a moment to describe this fiery ordeal through which you and your men have just passed.
Well, I haven't got much time. You can see things are a mess right now, but I'll do the best I can. You have questions, sir?
Thank you, sir. Well, for our readers back home, perhaps if you could share some details of the day. Clearly, the entire battle and perhaps the war itself has changed with the events of this afternoon. But what was the state of your unit, your brigade, as the day began? Where had General Gibbon placed you in the field?
Well, actually, we were in the center of the field. You see, we are a division, not just a brigade, and I'm an adjutant of that division. We're positioned at the center of the line. The men were marched very hot for the past 2 days, and they fought very well. We've lost hundreds in the past 2 days' action, however.
All right. Well, clearly the Confederates had taken control of the town,
yes,
and you were placed at Cemetery Ridge. What were your first signs of the impending assault this afternoon?
Well, the Secesh opened with the masked candidate, and their shots had mixed results. Several men were killed, and some shots landed near General Meade's headquarters, but they didn't have a lot of effect on our overall strength. Many of the shots were landed in very wide, overshot our position quite quickly.
Excellent. What role did you and your men play, in particular, in this action as the action unfolded?
Well, we were at the center of the line when we whipped it today, and although for a time it appeared to be a close affair, the rebels came out and they didn't make any battle cries as their custom. Very surprising. They came in multiple waves across the field, and I don't think I've ever seen such a determined and foolhardy endeavor. Our men put upon them a most withering fire, and they still came on. In a while they had closed. Some of them returned fire as they drew near our wall that was used by our men as a defense. The smoke really obscured the battlefield from my vantage point at that time, but I also observed many of our men break from the wall and yield it to the grayback. I was very lucky that this occurred right before me because I was able to rise forward, and I had to use the flat of my sword on the backs of a few men. I was able to halt the retreat and get the men to form a new line, and with those men we returned fire upon the enemy that came across the wall, and it appeared to me that any grayback that came across and stuck his head above the wall, he was cut down in an instant.
So you would say the enemy acquitted himself well?
I must say, when I saw those red flags above the smoke bunching together at the wall, I could not help but admire the bravery of the enemy. But as bravely as he charged on, he did run back across the field with equal vigor once he was repulsed.
And how was the attack ultimately repulsed? To whom would you give the credit for that dramatic event which we all witnessed?
Well, certainly the boys of my division bore most of the brunt of the assault. We did need reinforcements to close that breach. I found General Hall nearby. I asked him to send reinforcements. He sent a brigade which closed that gap.
Very good, sir. Where is General Lee's? Where are they now? Where's the enemy now? Do you expect further activity from him on this field today?
Well, our army is disposed in a fishhook pattern, moving from a couple of hills in the south up to Gettysburg in the north. That hook comes around before the town, doesn't go into the town, and then onto some high ground behind us. We occupy the high ground, the heights all the way around in this position. The enemy opposes us at every point of that line, but we believe that he is broken now. We think probably as many as 10,000 perhaps of the enemy came on, and we've killed scores of them. They were under artillery fire and rifle fire from the moment they left the cover of trees on the far end of the field, and we don't expect any more action from them today. We didn't even expect this, really. Many men were surprised by it. I don't think any general would order his men to do such a thing twice.
This seems so unusual for General Lee, who is known for his propensity to fight the defensive campaign and then to strike in
we think
not in this manner.
Campaign of a different nature. You see, we think that he believes by attacking us on our soil he can bring the war to a favorable conclusion for his side. But I think he is truly he has underestimated the determination of this army to oppose him.
Are the men in good spirits? I assume they would be, in spite of the defeats of the last year or so.
I think most of the men are relieved, and certainly in Washington they must. You know, Lee's army has seriously threatened Washington for the second time in this war, but it appears that the threat's now reduced. We'll just have to wait and see if they retreat tomorrow. But certainly we have reason to celebrate tomorrow.
How do you think President Lincoln and the government will respond to the news of this day's events?
Well, again, I think they'll be very, very celebratory to hear this. I think this ends the threat that he posed to Washington.
Well, of course, as a journalist, I must ask you to share any details that you would like to with our readers as far as the motivation of the troops. Many of our families back home know that their men are serving bravely and they're fighting for freedom, fighting for any number of things. Your men in particular, what would you say motivates them this day?
Well, first of all, I think the Army as a whole is fighting because if we don't make this fight and win, then no union anywhere will be safe and possible. All unions will be broken up at the whim of their members, and anarchy will simply prevail. Then only the strong will be free, and the weak will suffer the strong. Some of the men in my former brigade, in the Irish Brigade, those men, you know, in fact, there's many men in this year Army that aren't even born as Americans. This is their adopted home. And they are here fighting the very things that they ran away from. They're fighting oppression. They're fighting the tyranny of other people. And I think they're fighting for freedom and liberty. And that freedom and liberty is not upheld by our enemy, but it's upheld by the Union. When men stand together, they can better defend themselves against their enemies. The enemy represents anarchy. That is why these men fight. They're fighting against that. Many of these men are also fighting to prove that they can be good, patriotic Americans. And, well, we saw much evidence of that this past 3 days.
Do you think, what do you think our boys in blue feel about the Southern claim that they also fight for freedom, because I know reading the rebel press, we've understood that many of them feel they're fighting for their individual rights and freedoms against what they see as the oppression of a foreign power.
Davis, I'm sorry. You must not confuse anarchy with freedom. These men represent anarchy. They want each state wants to rule itself down there. They don't want to be any part of a civilized union or follow the rules of such a union, which they willingly joined many years ago. And if any man could simply leave a union, then any city could leave its state. Any man could leave his city. Each one of us becomes an individual state unto ourselves, and well, that is what we call anarchy. And again, you have a situation where the weak will simply suffer the depredations of the strong.
Very eloquently said, sir. I believe you know that I serve as an artist for Harper's, and I wonder if you could provide a few more details that perhaps I could include in my visual representation of what happened today. Maybe perhaps some portraits of your individual soldiers or some singular instances of valor that you witnessed.
Well, yeah, perhaps one of the most interesting things, I saw one of the Confederate generals coming forward at the head of his men. He had his sword raised and his hat had slid down on the sword to the hilt, but he was clearly rallying the men and leading them forward. I think at some point the charge almost stalled and he came out, and that's when I took note of him. I had a good view of the battle from my position, slightly on the hill in the center. And he actually came through our lines with those men. I expected him to be shot down at any instant. I am sure our men were aiming for him. He made such a splendid target, and he was eventually shot down once he came across that wall. I don't know this man's name, but he was obviously a general, and a very brave soul, if not foolhardy, for certain.
Some of the other correspondents have passed the word that it perhaps may have been General Armistead, the Virginian, Pickett's division.
Well, that is unfortunate, but it is not only the rebels who have lost leaders today. General Hancock was shot down on the field this morning as well. I believe he's still alive, but I'm told that his wound may be mortal. So, it is not the rebels only who have lost important men this day. We have as well.
That would be a great loss for our army. I hope to God General Hancock
he's a very brave man. I only caught a glimpse of him, and he was mounted. He was riding amongst the men to rally them at the same time I was trying to put the men back into line, and that's the last I saw. Probably shot down not long after that.
How are your casualties? Any figures, or is it too early to tell?
Well, we don't have the reports, and tomorrow we'll have a better idea, or hopefully even by tonight. The Army doesn't seem in too bad of a shape, except for here at the center. We're still recovering casualties, rounding up missing men. Many men took wounded comrades to the rear, so you won't have any firm reports. I know the past couple days some brigades suffered as much as 50% casualties.
Could you describe any more details for our readers as far as the sights and sounds that you are experiencing there?
It's a very hot day today. It's been hot for the past few days. It's been a very sharp battle, and I can sense something in all this fighting, the desperation of our enemy. I think he understands that this was his best opportunity to seize victory, and I hope today he realizes that best opportunity is now past, and that freedom and liberty have prevailed. And I hope that Mr. Davis down there, Jefferson Davis in the South, takes it upon himself to negotiate terms of surrender with President Lincoln so we can all put this behind us and go home and enjoy the blessings of fruits of liberty and freedom with our family, which is the reason why we are all proud citizens of this country.
Lieutenant, do you feel that the Confederates will indeed start considering peace proposals at this point, or do you see the war being prolonged?
Well, unfortunately, the war will probably be prolonged. The Confederates they are very audacious. They have incredible gall, and that charge today they made across over a mile of open ground. They were under withering fire the entire way, and still they came. And if they approach everything else that they do the way they approached our lines this morning, I do not expect it. But I also expect to have the result that their charge today produced, which is they will ultimately be defeated by the powers of freedom and liberty.
I hope that there's a promotion perhaps for yourself in the wind. Do you think that may be possible? General Gibbon, I'm sure, noticed your gallantry under fire.
Well, I think that was the farthest thing from my mind. It is certainly possible. Unfortunately, we lose too many of our high officers in many of these engagements, and merit or not, people are promoted very quickly simply on account of casualties. And, well, it's terrible to think, but I myself may not survive this war the way things are going for our officers.
Any final comments for our readers, Lieutenant?
Well, I want the country to know that these boys are making a brave sacrifice. And we know we miss everybody at home and we want to come home, but we must end this threat to our Union. We must preserve law and order and freedom and democracy, and we must take down this threat to that. And that is what we are determined to do this day.
I appreciate your time, sir. After I file this dispatch, I will head over to the field hospital and see if perhaps I can assist some of the wounded men in writing letters home and perhaps gathering some names to
very noble, sir.
Update the casualty.
Very noble of you. Thank you. Now, I must be going on. I have much to do.
Thank you, sir, for your time. God bless you for your efforts.
You're welcome, Mr. Day.
Major General George E. Pickett was portrayed by Ken Fry. James Allen Davis was portrayed by Turin Finney. And Lieutenant Frank Haskell was portrayed by Marshall Neal. Go to veteransradio.net next week to find links to their websites.
Gentlemen, thank you all for being with Veterans Radio. What we tried to do today was something a little bit different. Rather than talk about a battle, we decided that we would try to do a first-person interview with the people that were involved in the battle. A lot of research went into it. Those people that were playing the reenactors, they do that. They participated in the reenactment of the Battle of Gettysburg on the 140th anniversary of the battle. There were 11,000 reenactors and 80,000 spectators for it. It must have been a sight to see.
Yeah,
do you have any idea how many men died at Gettysburg on both sides?
No, I'd have to look it up, but I think Pickett did take about 5,000 dead. I think he marched with about 15,000 men and took one-third casualties.
I think that I was reading that there was about 28,000 killed on both sides. But again, the cost of freedom, and that's what we're talking about tonight. The cost of freedom is so high. It's not a story of maps, and it's not a story of leaders and such. It's a story of people.
Yeah.
Every one of those 28,000. Think about that. On each side, 56,000. Every one of them had a mother and a father the day they were born that were so proud of them. They grew up playing games, working farms, doing whatever they did. And then one day they died on a hot and dusty and dirty field in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and the concept of freedom, I mean, it's still heavily debated today. If we were in the South right now, the people in the South would be arguing to us that those Confederates were fighting for freedom, just as Lieutenant Haskell was. I mean, really interesting debate.
And something else that's constant. Something else that's constant is that part of the strategy of the South at Gettysburg was to have a victory in which that they would start the protest movement up in the North, that there was already a peace movement and a protest movement saying, let's end the war, let's negotiate, let's let them go. And that was part of their strategy, was to inflame that.
Yeah, I think a bigger part of the strategy, though, was Lee was in Gettysburg because if he could defeat the North on its own soil, the Confederacy was hoping the British would intervene in the war on the side of the Confederacy, break the Union naval blockade, and assist the South in defeating the North. In a way, like the French helped the colonials, the Continentals, defeat the British in the 1780s. But yeah, there was next year, 1864, during the presidential election, Lincoln's opponent was the fired general, George McClellan, who was heading the Democratic ticket on the idea of an armistice.
That's right. Yeah. And again, over in France during the Battle of the Somme, we had the French soldiers revolting after that, and and again they were looking for a negotiated settlement, which in that case was probably the right thing to do. But I don't know how much pressure there was behind the lines on the leadership.
I don't think much, but it certainly taught General Pershing and the Americans that they did not want to be under European command.
Absolutely. When our troops got over there, they fought with different tactics, and I was reading something about, our guys were a lot different. They were country boys still in those days, and I was reading about a Marine unit that with open sights would be able to pick off the Germans at 900 yards.
Yeah.
I mean, my gosh, nobody's ever shot like that before, and I don't know if anybody's ever shot like that since.
The Americans found some of the same problems the British and French had, but the Americans were only engaged for about 8 months. They took heavy casualties for those 8 months, but by that time the war had become once again a war of maneuver. So the whole idea of getting out of the trenches was the whole idea.
You only got out of the trenches to run into a machine gun, it seems like. Well, folks, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Veterans Radio. Next week, we've got the Battle of Britain with Dale Throneberry and Bob Gould as the host. Got a special guest, and it's someone who was there for the Battle of Britain. Now, there's another one where, what was it that Churchill said? Never in the course of human history have so many owed so much to so few. The British pilots, they kept the Germans at bay, and they kept Britain alive long enough for America to join the fray. Well, until next week, this is Veterans Radio, and you are dismissed.